Hello and welcome to A Bechdel Dysfunction, a podcast that dissects feminist films directed by men and discusses whether they are helpful or harmful. I'm Cara Strover.
And I am Harry Anderson. We are two film school underachievers who are heaps good at talking about movies, but not that flash at making them. We want to acknowledge that we are recording this on Wurundjeri land, and we would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We also want to extend that to any other First Nations people who may be listening. And just as a heads up as well, we will be discussing elements of sexual violence that are implied within today's film.
This week we are discussing the 1979 horror sci-fi classic Alien, directed by Ridley Scott and introducing the iconic action star Ellen Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver. In space, nobody can hear you scream, but they can hear this podcast.
Okay. Alien from 1979, directed by our dear friend from episode 2, Ridley Scott, written by Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett and possibly two other guys.
Allegedly.
Yeah, I think there's a reasonable amount of confirmation for that, but we'll get into it. Let me tell you, starring Sigourney Weaver, John Hurt, Harry Dean Stanton, Tom Skerritt, and Jonesy the Cat, the crew of a commercial spacecraft encounters a deadly life form after investigating an unknown transmission. Was this the first time for you watching this film?
No. I don't remember.
When did you first watch it?
I don't remember when I first watched it. I'm pretty sure I saw Aliens first, the sequel, because I remember watching it for like in like year 10 media or something. I don't really remember watching this for the first time. And I think it's one of those movies that is kind of a bit almost damaged by its like reputation. Because I'm pretty sure my first kind of impression was like, yeah, this is as good as everybody says it is. And then just didn't think about it again for like 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, highlighted in The Simpsons and pop culture. Just a massive, massive influence. It's hard. I don't know anyone of our age bracket who didn't encounter some sort of like parody of it before actually seeing it. But
yeah,
having said that, I think this is definitely up there with one of the movies that I've watched the most in my entire life.
Really?
And it's one of my favorite movies, just hands down. So I'm very excited to talk about this and nerd out. So
that's so interesting because I feel like we've never talked about it.
Yeah, I think it's just like because I like feasted on it. Would you like me to tell you my stories, my origin with Alien?
Yeah, go ahead.
My prequel, if you will, my Prometheus.
Your origin story, go on.
Yeah. So I've had a fascination with Alien from a small child, just hearing stories about it. I remember like my cousins telling me like the plot points of like, you know, like this spaceship lands and there's an alien that jumps on a guy's face and it bursts out of his chest, and just knowing all these like huge moments, and then like obviously seeing that in pop culture, like in The Simpsons when Willie's going through the air ducts trying to get Santa's little helper and there's a little blip, 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 like all those sorts of things. But I got it on DVD for my 11th birthday. So I saw this when I was 11. And I can't say I've ever actually found it scary, just because I was just so eager to watch it, and have watched it like dozens of times, and probably a bit like you with Legally Blonde, just like skip through it to like scenes that I loved. And, which is baffling because it's slow as shit.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I do find it scary. I found it scary on this rewatch. I think I watched like the director's cut. I don't know if maybe I watched the one that was too long. But I did see it a couple of years ago. I saw it in the theatre at the
theatre.
At the Astor Theatre. As a double
with the cultural elite, no doubt.
Yeah, as a double feature with Aliens. And that's pretty I think that was probably like my best time with it, because it is one of those films that really, you know, when you're actually watching it on a big screen, it does pop. So
yeah. Well, how did you find viewing it this time? Do you even like it? Do you like this movie?
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, no, I do. I feel like I kind of it's weird because I feel like it's the best one in the franchise, but in a way, it's kind of the least. And I was going to talk about it a bit more, sort of in regard to Ripley. It's almost kind of the least iconic, like, or it's the least mimetic. Like, you don't see as much of it, kind of, like on Facebook meme pages as you would. Probably like Aliens, or even like Alien 3 and like the one with the slime where she's got a shaved head and all that stuff. That kind of stuff is like a bit more mimetic, but I still think that the original is probably like the best actual movie of them all.
Yeah, which is really saying something because like obviously it's like as the films would go on, and I suspect I reckon we'll do Aliens next week. But it doesn't really. She doesn't become the protagonist until the third act, really. It's kind of just up in the air until that point, pretty much until Dallas passes away. I'm obviously referring to Sigourney Weaver playing Ellen Ripley. But I guess that's all part of the guessing game, the cat and mouse nature of it all. Because although aesthetically it is science fiction, it is a horror film.
Yeah. And it's like, it's kind of a slasher. Like, it really follows the slasher format, which I think was interesting in terms of, and we can talk about Ripley like being an iconic character. I don't really think she kind of reaches that level of iconic until probably Aliens. Because like, Aliens is where you get, stay away from her, you bitch. And like, where she takes on the alien queen and we have to nuke it from orbit. That's the only way to be sure. That's where all that comes from. Yeah. Which are all like these epic one-liners, which aren't really in this movie because I think Alien itself is like a bit more grounded, in a way, despite being sci-fi, it's like a bit more kind of realistic. Yeah, like definitely the characters are, and it works really well as an ensemble piece. And then it kind of lays out in like format, almost like a slasher, with everyone just getting picked off until you have the final girl, which is Ripley, so she kind of fits into this tradition with like. Or what was happening at the time with like Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I don't think she kind of reaches full icon until the sequels. But I think that's again in the film's favor because I think it's a better film. Like the rest of the cast and characters are just kind of more real and interesting than they are.
I could not agree more. Yeah,
like I love the characters in the sequels, but they're not. Like real people in the way that they kind of are in Alien.
Yeah, in every sense, like it is truckers in space. As far as any sort of media that I can come across, sort of analyzing this, it is the first time that space has sort of been shown in cinema as being very casual and blasé. Like there's nothing sexy or like glossy about it. It's just like, yeah, we're just in this big fucking ship and we're just moving the minerals around. And even the dialogue is so casual. Like even like us talking before was like, what was a funny line that we were going to put in the intro? Like, oh shit, there isn't really one apart from like the main tagline, which isn't even said in the film.
But even like the first kind of lines of dialogue are like about a contract dispute. About how much money we're going to get when we finish the job, which is it's just kind of crazy. Like that would never. And I mean, you can talk about the state of cinema now. Like you would never kind of get that kind of stuff in movies these days. I don't know. It's just, there's something really.
I think you're right. And I guess a lot of that has to do with like how anti-corporation this film is.
That's another kind of a real interesting thread in the Aliens. Actually, I feel like the Alien movie we've talked about most is Alien vs Predator, which we
because it's fucking sick.
Yes, it slaps. And that went,
people who don't think that that's canon can go and get fucked.
We don't. Who cares?
No. I get 5 minutes to nerd out about all of this. It's canon. I don't give a shit.
But yeah, anyway. We're very anti Weyland Yutani.
Yeah,
and that's another theme I think as well gets explored really well in this series. So, and actually, like as a series, it's. I mean, we're probably not going to talk about like Alien 3. Like, okay, so Alien 2's kind of got like. The military complex, and then Alien 3 is kind of about prisons, and I haven't seen Alien 4, but like I'm sure there's something kind of political going on there.
Yeah, the military trying to weaponize the alien. So and anyway, it's huge establishments treating people as expendable little
which would never
parasites,
happen in
really.
real life. It's good that that sort of thing only happens in the movies.
Yes, yeah. And we only get iconic male directors to tell these stories, who then forge huge careers after each one of them. But okay, look, I just want to ask a few fun questions.
Okay.
Because it's a real big blockbuster that's just like so entrenched in the zeitgeist and is like filled with huge moments. Do you have a particular favorite moment from this movie? Do you want me to put them up for you? Do you want me to say?
Do you want to put some suggestions? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm putting them all out there. There's the face hugger moment where it jumps out of the egg. There's the chest burster. There is the blip, blip, blip in the vents.
Oh no, that bit scares me so much.
It's pretty spooky. And of those three, pick one of those.
Okay, like my favorite, I probably like the chest burster. I think it's the most iconic. But like in terms of, I mean, even as I was watching it the other night, I was kind of tempted to skip through the bit in the vent because it is so tense. That gets to me the most. So I'll say my favorite bit is still probably the chest burster. It's
okay. Cool. Yeah, it's solid. And filmed without any of the actors knowing what was going to happen. So all those reactions are real.
Yeah.
Which is just awesome trivia, I think.
It's so, I mean, I think with that scene, it's so shocking, and it still is. Like, it still has that, it's still really visceral, and it's all part of, even knowing the lead up. But like, I just kind of, it's one of those ones where you get a little bit jealous of like people who maybe got to go into this movie with no idea that was coming. Because obviously I knew about the chest burster scene, and I kind of knew about, I hadn't like seen it. I hadn't seen the clip before, but I'd heard about it. So I knew it was coming, and I knew it was like the first kind of big thing that happened. So you don't kind of get, I think, that same level of tension, but but having said that, it's so well executed that you still feel it even knowing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I get something new out of this movie every time I watch it, and I'm like really pushed up there for the amount of times that I've seen it. And what I wouldn't give to be able to like see this for the first time as an adult, I think that would be just like utterly amazing. Or be an adult and view this for the first time ever. Just because there's also so much ambiguity in it. Like there's so many things that just are left unanswered. Like even like when they land on the ship and they see the space jockey, just like this weird, like completely uncanny, bizarre alien monster that no one can really quite figure out exactly what it is. And that's just there, and it's on a ship that's just there that doesn't really look like a ship, and you have no idea how the fuck it could ever fly. And you have no idea where these eggs came from, like which is obviously gets ruined by the prequels.
Yeah, I was going to say, good thing
pretty comfortable to say that. Yeah, just some of the most awful retconning you've ever seen in cinema. But yeah, it's a classic, and I love it so much. And I'm looking forward to sort of picking apart perhaps its effect on the cultural zeitgeist, which I would say in terms of what we do about this pod, I'm probably a little bit in the dark about. So I'm looking forward to exploring some ideas with you about all of that.
That's interesting.
Isn't that nice?
There is one thing I kind of want to say, like, as you said about sort of taking on new things. Like in this most recent viewing, I was probably thinking about like the kind of feminist angle of it a little bit more, and really kind of come at it with a critical eye. But actually what I was really sort of struck by on rewatch is knowing that Ash is an android, and how he's also like he's also a misogynist. Like he's a misogynist robot. And I'm so like, and that had never kind of really occurred to me before, because I don't think I didn't really used to think about it kind of in that way. So it was really fascinating to me, because I'm sitting there thinking like, is this subconscious or like accidental, or is it deliberate by, the performer Ian Holm, who's like, like he's an amazing actor. Like I know
classically trained thespian
and he's,
operator. Yeah.
Famously Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit. And I think he was in a Harry Potter or something as well. He's been around. You've seen him and stuff.
Yeah. He's got the runs on the board.
And like, I just think it's in a really, like, if that's a deliberate choice, and even if it's not, it doesn't really matter because it's in the film. It's such a good like method of misdirection because it makes him more believable as a human. It's the fact that he kind of is a misogynist and is particularly like disdainful towards Ripley because I think she takes on an authoritarian role and he finds that particularly challenging because she's a human woman. And like, it's really, and I was also kind of, and I really found this interesting parallel because, the scene where is revealed to me a robot, android, whatever. I don't know.
I would also consider that to be one of the great moments of the film, which I forgot to mention.
Yeah, but
yes, that's probably my favorite.
The scene where he attacks Ripley, like I've seen some kind of references, and I think it's pretty obvious that he kind of mimics the alien's behavior, right? Because he tries to like suffocate her, like he shoves like a rolled up magazine down her throat. The way that the alien, like the face hugger, kind of shoves the tube down John Hurt's throat.
It's a rolled up porn magazine as well.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Like, there's the added sexual content.
He's mimicking the alien's behavior, but the choice of like the Playboy magazine and having like the nudie photos in the background is him also taking on the aggressive sort of behaviors of human men as well as the alien. So I just like found that kind of fascinating, and it wasn't something that I had really thought about on previous viewings. So I was like, that is really good. Like it's really good for like the audience because it just makes you really don't pick up that he's and I think that is part of it. Like it's so integral, but it's so because like misogyny is sort of so normalized, and because that kind of dismissive, like his attitudes and stuff. Probably not as evident in the other male characters, but like they're there and like throughout similar cinema generally. So it's just such a smart move or a total accident. I don't know, but either way, it's in the movie and it
seems very deliberate.
And it's genius. Like
I reckon you're on the money. I think it's very deliberate. I'm sure if not Ian Holm, that would have been something that he and Ridley Scott would have done together. I'd imagine, because it's just it is so evident there, and that's one of the great things about rewatching this is analyzing Ash's behavior. Because like once you know the reveal of him being a robot programmed to send them to that planet to get the specimen that he knows all about and always has known about, it's just great to reverse engineer that. And it's one of the great assets of it.
I think that's why I was thinking about it because I used to like not. It wasn't a plot point that I was like, oh, he's a robot, I don't care. But this time I was kind of like, no, actually pay attention and try and watch the way that he behaves with the knowledge that he's operating. And I was also trying to sort of think about it in the context of AI of like, is he a rogue AI? And he's not a rogue AI. He's following his directive, which is get the specimen back to Earth, all other priorities rescinded, basically. Secondary, crew expendable. So there's that element, which is he is just following the directive, but it's also like, it's just weird. Like it kind of balances up perfectly with this just very human looking misogyny integrated with this very robot crew, like human life expendable kind of attitude. And that's an interesting comment itself on like, I think corporate culture and I don't know, like not fully, these are unfortunately listeners, not very fully formed thoughts, but I found that
but
really
very thought-provoking thoughts.
I found that I was very impressed by that on this particular sitting.
Well, yeah, and you saying that has sort of just really made me, and I noticed this on the viewing because obviously it was at the front of my mind, but all the human characters on the ship are tremendously androgynous, I find. There's nothing particularly sexual about them all the way down to just like they're all wearing the same clothes. I mean, Parker has one line where he sort of like alludes to cunnilingus, but I'm pretty sure that was just ad-lib and just ended up in there out of sheer laziness or someone wanting a laugh. But that's sort of the only sort of anything sexual that comes out of any of the characters. And then the xenomorph itself, by sheer design, is just like this hypersexual being. So I think those two forces coming together.
Hypersexual, but also like sexually ambiguous. And kind of it's the art design of that creature is like, I mean, I've heard some arguments that it's more kind of ambiguous than it is. I think it's pretty phallic. That's pretty obvious. But there's,
absolutely.
like crossover there as well. Also, just a little fun fact that according to like a screenshot in Aliens, that Lambert is actually a trans woman assigned AMAB. There you go. Hey. I don't know if that like adds anything of note, but there you go. There's my trivia for this movie.
I think that's a pleasant discovery, a welcome discovery. Thanks for derailing me mid-sentence. I was really flying. That's all good. It's all good. No, I was just saying, like, yeah, I think that's just a nice little subtle conflict, just like the very hypersexual xenomorph. Like you say, it is ambiguous, but if you know anything about Geiger and Geiger's work, it's all pretty based in like intense sexuality. Obviously, he's the designer of the xenomorph. Well, how about we have a chat about the people who made this?
We can
pick it apart. And yes. So as we were sort of just talking like off air, just in the lead up to this, writers Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett, who came up with a story of this and did the original screenplay, which ended up being very different and required some rewrites from producers David Giler and Walter Hill, who in their rewrites introduced the character of Ash. And no doubt, whilst introducing him, brought in the whole subplot of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. We've talked a lot about Ridley Scott as well previously. I think we know where his intentions lie and how he sort of perceives women.
I just like to quickly touch on Ridley. Like, I think it's pretty obvious with this film, and also we've already talked about Thelma and Louise, and even his more recent work, like The Last Duel. Like, I think obviously it feels reductive to just say he's interested in women, but like the role of women in society and the representation of women, and also things like male violence are obviously themes that he's interested in exploring in a nuanced way, and something that he feels strongly about to come back to so many times, sometimes less successful than others. So I was kind of like, he seems like an ally in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. Shorthand, Ridley's an ally.
Yeah. He's trying his best.
Raised by his mother, and no doubt gave him a lovely moral compass. And he just seems... sorry, there's just a bunch of notifications that popped up on my screen then and just completely derailed me. But anyway, so Ridley's good. He's fine. We know his intentions. Anyone wants to hear us analyse more about him, listen to our episode on Thelma and Louise, episode 2, the long one. But yeah, look, had a look at some of Dan O'Bannon's stuff and Ron Shusett's stuff. Ron came up with the story, well, at least the story that went to screen for Total Recall. Obviously, that's a Philip K. Dick book, but
yeah, do you like
Philip K. Dick stuff? Not really.
Neither. It's kind of boring.
Actually, yeah, and it's shot really badly. Look, I think there's a great story there. I honestly do. I just think it's executed really poorly. And I'm in like the rare. I'll probably get exiled from the sci-fi nerd community for this, but I actually think the remake is better from 2012. But even then, it's not very good. But yeah. Look, there's a loophole of reasons, and it's really fucking boring. But yeah, look, I'm going to be scathing without much evidence here, but they
go ahead.
They just seem like really big sci-fi style fans, and are not necessarily interested in the themes and sort of morals that are then explored and elaborated on as these films grow on. So something that's most interesting about it, and like Ron Shusett's decision to write all these characters without gender, so they could be played potentially by anyone. However, I'm pretty confident that that was so they could get like their little indie budget film off the ground and just get it be picked up by like a bigger production company, because they were trying to ship this out to Roger Corman, famous B-movie maker from the 70s. Shout out to Piranha 2. So like, yeah, they were more interested in just trying to hit a broader audience out of desperation to make this film rather than being sort of, you know, liberators of women on screen.
But even from what I've heard, which is not much, like I had heard that before, that Ripley was just written, or I actually hadn't heard that it was written as gender neutral. The story I'd always heard was that it was written as a man, and then at some point they were just like, what if we cast a woman instead, and didn't change anything else? And that was like so revolutionary, because it was like she was just, you know, a competent person because she was originally written as a man. And like that, I think for 1979, that's a pretty progressive kind of thing to do. I think these days it's kind of, I don't want to say negative. I actually think like writing characters kind of gender neutral is probably not a bad approach necessarily, but just taking like a character that's a man and then being like, we're just going to make it a woman instead. It's kind of similar to like, we'll just take this character that was originally white and we'll make them not white now, or this character was straight and we'll make them gay now. Like, you kind of lose something in any sense of like perspective of what's that experience is actually like. So it's like, it's all cool to be like, oh, she's just like anyone else and she's a woman. When, you know, there are things about being a woman that like impact how you experience and interact with the world. So those things can kind of be missed out. And I feel like it's a very sort of straight white male thing to do, to just, I'm going to write this and also to just assume that like the character you're writing is so neutral that you could put like any identity on it and it would work and it would make sense. When like,
which is a very classic sci-fi thing for characters to be considered secondary to overall style. Some of the great sci-fi writers are like notorious for just making shit paper thin characters. Philip K. Dick and Lovecraft in particular, whose content I love, but they can't write a full story to save themselves. But just to confirm, I'm sorry, I know I've cut you off, but in the rewrites by Walter Hill and David Giler, that's when they wrote Ripley to be a man. And originally, obviously, with Shusett and O'Bannon, they were gender neutral for a broader audience, but then it was Ridley Scott's decision to make Ripley a woman in pre-production. So that's just how that full circle happened anyway, just for anyone playing along at home. But yeah, I think all your points stand entirely.
And I think that's interesting, like, because even I know you shared a video with me about the writing, and they had discussed, the producers whose names I've already forgotten, who they had discussed.
It's fine. We don't really need to mention them anymore.
They had discussed making Ripley a woman as kind of like almost a cynical thing of like latching on to a trend. But for me, my gut instinct is that if it was like Ridley Scott's kind of call, it's that he kind of did it in a really deliberate way to like make a point. But maybe also it's a bit like these things aren't mutually exclusive. It can be all of these things.
Yeah, like, and they change with time, especially if it's just like that wasn't necessarily a purpose. I think it just entirely to subvert expectation, because as we discussed in the beginning of this, there is no main character until the final act. So I think it is in order to keep it that sort of guessing game, that horror element. And Scott has quoted that he wanted to make Texas Chainsaw Massacre in space. So, and it is common in horrors to start with an ensemble cast and then bust down to a protagonist.
And if anything, actually, like that's another kind of piece of misdirection, is that like Tom Skerritt is the first named cast in the opening credits. And he, as the captain, kind of I don't actually think he really does take on like a leading role, but you kind of just put it straight onto him anyway, and then he's like the third to die, or like so.
Yeah.
You know, they kind of play with it that way, which is like just it's fun, it's good, it's quality viewing.
Yeah. It's awesome. And just keeps you entertained and captivated. All right, so fair to say.
Oh, actually,
the writers.
Just sort of before we go, because we talked about the ensemble cast a lot, and I just want to do a quick shout out to Balaji Badejo, who is the actor who performs the alien.
Yes.
This is his only film credit. He didn't really want to do any films again after this. And I think he just, like, one of the key things when you're like a suit actor or like playing a creature or something like this is that you as the audience kind of forget that there's a person doing all that. And like you do, he's so good in this. Like his movement is so sort of like insect-like and animalistic and so like not human. Like particularly in the end when he's when the aliens like when they're on the shuttle and Ripley thinks she's escaped, and then it's kind of revealed like he's sort of been able to blend into the ship. Like it's so good. So just sadly died very young in 1992 at age 39. But you know, brought to life this amazing piece of like culture. So just, you know, shout out to Balaji Badejo. For a one acting gig, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and even just like that body language of the xenomorph, it just echoes through all the other Alien films. So like that legacy just carries on. Because I think that continuity is there in all the other films. That sort of like that insect-like movement. It's just incredible, and a fantastic name. Very aesthetically pleasing. So but shame that he passed away so young. Yeah, dour note.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, that'll be it, folks. Fucking see you later.
And obviously, and also like as we've just mentioned a few times, like it's an ensemble cast. Like there's some big hitters in this movie. Like obviously Sigourney Weaver. I think her breakout role basically. Tom Skerritt, Harry Dean Stanton, John Hurt, and then also Ian Holm, who we've talked about, and Yaphet Kotto, who's Parker, Harry Dean Stanton's kind of boss, and Veronica Cartwright, who I feel bad for because she kind of wanted to play Ripley and ended up as Lambert and always kind of resented that she kind of was the hysterical woman. And look, she is the most emotional and she does cry a lot. But I will say in her defense, that is what I would be doing. So somebody's going to do it.
I think it's, and I've got a feeling we're going to be talking about her very soon. But in greater detail. But I understand that she sort of gets painted with like this hysterical brush, sort of in the same way of like Shelley Duvall in The Shining, it's realistic, and I think her performance is awesome, especially when they're sort of having that crisis meeting after Dallas has been killed, and you have that tight shot on her face, and she's crying, and she's like on like the brink of being hysterical, and just these bright blue glacial eyes. I think she just throws down so hard. I actually think everyone like in this cast is incredibly elite, and they sort of bring like a huge passion for something that is effectively like an indie drama. It's seven people in 4 rooms. That's this movie, and I think they bring like a gravitas that probably hadn't been seen by either horror movies or sci-fi movies of that time. I think that's what makes it so unique. It's just like their performances are so grounded in reality, as you've touched on. But the cast is massive. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch on because you brought up the ensemble cast?
No, I would agree. Like I think that the casting, and I think it's the combination of like the more sort of sophisticated writing and edits that were probably made by the producers on the film, and also like the level of talent in the cast that just kind of elevate it. I agree. I think you're right.
Lovely. let us move into whether or not this movie has aged well. What is your initial reaction to that?
I think obviously it's aged well. It's still, like, as a film, it's aged well. I would say most. Okay, in terms of what we're going to talk about, like, I can sit here and talk about. It's still scary. It still looks amazing. The cast is still excellent. The writing is still excellent. The themes are still relevant. Mm-hmm. There's one moment of cringe that I do want to bring up, which is Ripley slowly stripping down to her little tank top and panties.
Cool. That's what I wanted to talk about as well.
I will just say, like, I guess it's not the most unbelievable thing to ever happen. And, it's not like that. Like, it's not like he's revealed to be, like, wearing lingerie or some shit. Like, it's all utilitarian. But, I mean, it's just there for ogling. It's just there to, like, get and it's really kind of framed in a way that I don't. That it doesn't fit. You know what it is? I don't know if you've ever seen the second Star Trek Into Darkness, but there's a moment in Star Trek Into Darkness where Chris Pine as Jim Kirk is, like, being introduced to the science woman Carol or some shit. I don't know. And anyway, he's, like, looking ahead, and then he turns around briefly, and she's just suddenly, like, in her bra and panties, and then she's like, "What are you?" Turn around, and it's the most bizarre moment. It's like, why is it in this movie? And it's kind of, and that's what I feel about this. I don't like it.
Yeah, no, me neither. Hot take. It is so bizarre and out of place to just have all of a sudden this, like, weird male gaze thrust upon this movie when it hasn't existed for, an hour and 40 minutes before that.
It feels really pandery to, like, there are going to be some nerd boys in the audience that want to see, like, Princess Leia in the gold bikini before that had even happened. So we better. Yeah. But I will say, actually, even just thinking about it then, and I don't think this is cringe, and I would even think it's maybe a stylistic choice, but there were parts of the scene of Ash attacking Ripley that were almost kind of a little bit eroticized, which is not necessary. I mean, that
would you like to specify?
Probably in the way that Ripley is, like, once he's kind of thrown her on the table, there's a kind of a certain sort of writhing and the noises that she's making that are, like, almost sexual. And then also probably this sense of enjoyment and thrill that is just emanating from, the robot at the opportunity to attack this woman, which unfortunately, it's not uncommon in cinema for, like, scenes of violence against women to be eroticized that way. So I don't know if I would necessarily call it cringe. It's just sort of something, to be, like, that you take note of. Like, it's noticeable to me that I'm like, ugh, this is almost a bit sexy and it's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that because it makes perfect sense, but it's something that I hadn't picked up on, possibly because I've been watching this movie since I was a child, and sometimes it's just hard to, like, break beyond your initial reaction or, like, your viewing of that and pick that up. But look, that makes perfect sense. I mean, the struggle. Yeah, what is it? Intricate rules to touch each other.
Intricate rituals.
Intricate rituals
to touch the skin of other men.
Yes. What is that from?
It's a piece of artwork by Barbara Kruger,
friend of the podcast.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for educating me. Look, and I realize I haven't said. I've just kind of just been sitting here and agreeing with you. And I should probably give something to this. But what has crossed my mind while I've just been listening to you is that, and we mentioned this in Thelma and Louise, that Ridley Scott, although we believe his heart is in the right place in terms of being an ally, that he does have these moments of being a touch tone deaf. And I suspect that the undressing in the escape pod is definitely part of that. But it just seems like he drops the ball sometimes.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
I wouldn't even know. Like, that could even honestly be like a studio mandate. Like, oh, we need something. Like, or and in terms of the fight scene, like, I don't even know if I would necessarily put that on like Ridley Scott, like not like as an individual, because I just think it's quite pervasive in cinematic language to like film, you know, scenes of violence against women that way. So, it's like that's not on him. That's kind of on like the system of like how Hollywood works and how it's developed that way. Yeah, the underwear scene is just it just takes you out of it, because I'm just like, why is this happening? Like, why?
Yeah.
And it goes for quite a while as well. Like, it's not a quick, she just takes her thing off because she's like hot. Because I mean, like, you can sit there and you can be like, you can make your Thermian argument of like, oh, well, she's just been running around and she just set this ship on fire and she might be really hot and sweaty and she's like wants to sleep, so she takes her outfit off. And it's like, okay, so why does it go for like a minute and a half of her slowly like stripping off? Like, we know that's not why it's there. It's there for you. That image of Ripley in her underwear is on the screen for men to ogle at. Like, that's its purpose. So it could not be there, and the movie would be probably a little bit better.
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard like some pretty half-hearted defenses, just like, oh, it's about building tension before the reveal of the monster. Like, she's exposing herself because she doesn't think that she's vulnerable. I'm just like, nah, cuz, that ain't it.
Also, a quick shout out to Jonesy the cat, being a good cat, letting Ripley pick him up, put him in that carrier. There's a moment where she throws the carrier where I'm like, oh.
Yeah, real clunk and thud when all the fire's happening.
But
look, don't let Jonesy off the hook, because, you know, he does lead Harry Dean Stanton to his death. Spoilers. Oh yeah, spoilers as well. Ash kitty.
Spoilers as well. Ash is a robot, and Dallas dies third, and everybody dies except Ripley, and the cat lives, which we love.
Yeah,
we love it when a cat lives.
Yeah,
a big orange cat as well. So you know that cat is dumb.
Yeah, the only character in this whole franchise that does not die on screen. So Jonesy probably still alive,
for all we know.
Yeah, hasn't even been born yet, because it's set in the future. Okay, right. And look, if you haven't seen Alien and you're this far into this, like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, just watch this movie. Watch the movie.
It's good.
All right.
I promise.
Guaranteed. All right. It is time for Sexy Lamp, our favourite segment. My favourite segment, your least favourite segment, but it's all about contrast here at A Bechdel Dysfunction. Quick recap on the criteria for this segment. If you can replace any female character with a sexy lamp and it makes no difference to the plot or story of your film, you are a hack. Cara, who is your sexy lamp?
It's got to be Lambert this week. Poor Lambert. Well, there's only, I've picked men before, but I would say.
Yeah. We've, to full disclosure, we have been like,
we're pretty
swapping
fast and
that
loose.
around very freely. Yeah, very fluid.
Pretty fast and loose with the rules on this pod. I don't know if you've noticed, but Lambert. I think he just has the weakest probably characterization. But even that being said, even when you were talking before, like when she's
it's by default, really, isn't it?
I don't know if I would kind of classify her as. I don't know if I would really even classify her as hysterical because she still manages to like do everything she's asked to do. Do you know what I mean? Like, tends to be when you have like, you know, a screaming woman, she basically just has to get carried around everywhere at a certain point. Whereas Lambert's still like, you know, goes with Parker at the, I can't remember exactly, but like she still does everything that she's asked to do to like help the crew as she's going on. She doesn't sit in the corner screaming and huddled, which is what I would be doing. So I feel a little bit bad for her. Like, you know, Lambert is me and I'm Lambert.
It's sexy lamp by default. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
Me too, man. I would, well, you could give it to Jonesy if you want.
No, Jones is integral.
Oh, yeah.
Jones is too important.
Yeah, well, he pushes the plot along, that's for sure.
Because at the end,
yeah.
when she picks him up and gives him that hug, I'm like, yeah, that's what I'd need too. I need a little
and great
hug.
cat acting when he's been very grumpy at the end. Yeah, he goes into that sleeper tube and gets his food that was probably put there by a second AD. So Lambert, Miss Cartwright is our sexy lamp for episode 5. Congratulations. You join an illustrious group of people who get an imaginary prize by a really small podcast. So good luck to you. Shall we move into our grading criteria?
Yes.
Cool. Excellent. Assertive. Like a member of the Nostromo, willingly doing whatever they're told to do despite dangerous outcomes. Okay, so let's identify our criteria, which is what we should always be doing. So we've been grading all the films that we have been reviewing with 3 simple questions. 1, does it Fight Club? Does she make it? And does it Bechdel? And we change the order of those every time. Yeah, like you say, it's fucking fast and loose.
I was thrown by the order then.
I know. Might change it around. I might put does she make it last? Okay. Does it Fight Club? Meaning, does this film have a reverse effect of what it was intended to do? With direct relation to Fight Club as an example, a movie that should have been about just a basic mental health is bad and difficult 101, but ended up making children punch each other in the face. Cara, does Alien, directed by Ridley Scott from 1979, Fight Club?
I just want to point out, this is what you should really take from this podcast and from Harry specifically, is that mental health is bad. But I don't think this does Fight Club. I feel like this is the cleanest. I can't really think of like a bad faith take for it, if you know what I mean. I can't,
unless there's someone out there who's like, yeah, the xenomorphs, man, great idea.
But yeah, okay, maybe there are some like corporate people out there who are like, I fully am on the side of Ash and Wayland Yutani in this scenario. Yeah. I kind of feel like, and especially with Ripley kind of reaching that iconic status, I don't think there's a lot of like fanboys who are like, actually women shouldn't be in space. Like, I think this one doesn't Fight Club. This is my most definitive for me so far of the ones of not Fight Clubbing, I would say.
I would absolutely agree. It's just very deliberate in its intentions, that's for sure. Does it Bechdel? It absolutely does. Mm-hmm. And it is one of the reasons why the Bechdel test exists. This is the film that is referenced in the comic strip that the Bechdel test is referenced from. Just for sheer criteria, I will read out the rules of the Bechdel test as per the Feminist Film Guide, as I do every week. 1, the film has to have at least 2 women in it, and they have to be named. That's our rule. We just add that in. Who talk to each other about something besides a man. And Ripley and Lambert talk about the monster for a bit. The origins of the Bechdel test and one of the defining, I guess, movies that points out how low the bar is. It Bechdels. What can I say? What can you say?
I think Bechdel is even more than that. Like, I think for me, a really important part of the Bechdel test is like, do the women have something to talk about other than men? Do you know what I mean? Like, at no point would men even come up as a point of conversation. Although I do remember reading somewhere about like there was some original scenes in the script about like Ripley's sleeping with Dallas or some shit like that. And it's like, cut all
Yes.
that out. Cut all that out. Thank God that's not in there. Just makes it better.
Yeah, considering they have no chemistry whatsoever. I also think Dallas is just like the most boring character in the whole thing. Like he's bringing the least.
He's such a, like, just
Vanilla ice cream dad.
But also just, I want to go home. Like, I want to, like, you know, he's a very kind of middleman sort of corporate guy. Like, I'm not going to ask any questions. Ripley, stop telling me about I just get it done the fastest way possible. And I'm, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. He's perfect for a real patsy run that is like this mission. Like he's so manipulated by Ash, like in every scene.
Yeah. But it's so, and I would go back, I think, just again, like the way, in terms of like the realism of the performances, like the way they're all kind of, I guess like working stiffs is the way, but the way they're all sort of like constantly feeling the oppression of like the jobs that they have as well. It's so well done and so relatable. I don't know.
Yes.
My job's not that bad, so.
Okay. A Bechdels.
A Bechdels,
we can agree.
Yep. Sorry, off track.
Yes. And the big one, does she make it? So I guess in reference to this being a standalone film, she does make it. The sequels might have something else to say about that further down the line, because I feel like there's like a lot of like prolonged trauma from this that gets explored in the next few films. But yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, she makes it, like, in terms of, what do we used to call it? Like, did she roar? Like, you know, she succeeds. She overcomes the alien. She's the sole survivor. Probably her life would be better if the events of the film hadn't happened. I think the only thing I would maybe say, and not to be like controversial, but just in a similar way, I guess, to like Elle Woods, is that Ripley doesn't really like change over the course of the film. She starts out like, you know, successful and competent and like trusts herself. Like at the very start of the film, she's like giving directions and she's saying, no, you can't bring him on board, and no, you can't do this, and we have to do this to protect the crew. And it's everybody else around her who's just kind of ignoring her, basically. And she's sort of vindicated in the sense that she turns out to be right. So it's...
Well, there are no character arcs in this movie. Like, no. It's just like, it's a bunch of people in a circumstance.
And I guess I would like, because I talked about her sort of being in the sense of like a final girl, but a traditional sort of horror final girl would probably have, you could say, the kind of flimsy arc of like, well, there's a certain point at which they have to toughen up and like become strong enough to overcome the antagonist. Whereas with Ripley, it's sort of always there. She just manages to do it at the end. So I would say it's like, she didn't need this experience to become the fully realized, powerful woman that she is, because she already was that at the start of the film. And then she just unfortunately encountered a really dangerous alien.
Yeah, that gives her just nightmares and suffering and paranoia and mental health issues, which are bad, until the day she dies.
Sacrificing herself to destroy an alien. I mean, there's things to say about Alien 4, but anyway.
Yeah. I mean, there really is.
But you know what? In the sequel, she almost gets to hook up with my dream man, Michael Biehn. So, swings and roundabouts, you know.
Exactly. You got to enjoy the tiny little wins when you get them. And the character arc in Aliens is obviously, way more sentimental and more established because, I guess, of the groundwork that Ridley Scott put in with his first film for James Cameron that to use as a launching pad, which we'll talk about next week.
Maybe.
No, I'm deciding. We've got to do it. We've got to do these back to back. We won't do all the other ones, but we'll do Aliens because, you know, after that, they're all just like a bit, how you going? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you find this film helpful or harmful?
I'm giving it a helpful. It gets a pass mark from me. It's aged really well. Aside from like the underwear scene, there isn't really much that I take issue with. I think Ripley's so important as like one of the original female action stars female action heroes. It's pretty trite now, but at the time it was groundbreaking. And yeah, like with anything, there's criticisms to be made, but for me on the whole, it's like, yes, pro. Success.
Yeah.
You did the feminism pretty good for a man in 1979.
Yeah. Like the Bechdel test, the bar was low. And still is, probably. Cool. Well, let's, instead of just going straight into a wrap-up, how about we talk a little bit about just Sigourney Weaver and... Well, let's go into a little bit more detail because it's such an iconic role. It's the lasting legacy of this film. It is what makes it a feminist film. I think we can both agree on. What does Sigourney Weaver's performance as Ellen Ripley mean to you?
What does it mean to you? I feel like you have a stronger kind of connection to it than I do.
Well, it's just changed over time. Like I said, I watched this as a child, like a prepubescent child. I've never ever had like the sexual attachments to it that the oglers of the underwear scene would have had. So I've always just seen her as like just a nuts and bolts hero. And obviously seeing it, in the 2000s, decades after it came out, didn't necessarily come across as like groundbreaking to see a woman as a protagonist. So I'm grateful that I have always been able to view it as just a normal thing, and that's a privilege that I have, and I'm really lucky to be able to do that. But yeah, I can only assume I guess the hero title for women experiencing it in 1979 must have been like just completely unbelievable. I can't fathom it.
For me, like I said, I definitely saw Aliens first. And also I knew of like Ripley as existing in the pop culture before I ever saw Alien. So it's a bit hard for me to talk about the character of Ripley just in the context of this film because, like we've already said, if anything, she's sort of more subdued. And like he only really takes on that kind of action hero role towards the very end. And again, like when you compare it to Aliens where he puts on the like mech suit basically and goes to fight the Queen Alien. In this movie, it's all about evasion, successfully evading and then managing to like throw the alien out of an airlock using her wits. It's not actually particularly combative, except for some of the stuff with the flamethrowers. But you know what I'm saying? Like it's more about escape, I think, than it is about a traditional, like more head-on sort of fight. So I kind of... But like again, I sort of love this version of Ripley more. Like she's just kind of funner. Like we get to see her be more normal at the start of the movie and also be like a bit of a stick in the mud. And like she's just very real. And I love Sigourney Weaver. Like, yeah, I don't know. There's just, like I said before, she just seems like a real person. And then in the sequels, less so because it becomes so bombastic. But yeah, I mean, she just has this place, but I keep coming back to it, like this iconic place in pop culture. But for me, it sort of starts, 90 minutes into this movie and then goes on.
Yeah, she really sort of takes that sort of action hero mantle in Aliens, which I really can't wait to start picking apart. All right, well, that just about does it for another episode of A Bechdel Dysfunction, a podcast that analyzes feminist films directed by men and discusses whether they are helpful or harmful. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll catch you next time. See ya.